Tony Soprano, Shinji Ikari. Let's compare and contrast these two characters. Ridiculous, I know, but we can probably get some amusement out of it and maybe actually learn something about both The Sopranos and Neon Genesis Evangelion. This is the beginning of the Gabagoolion experiment, a high-effort shitpost that will make your brain burst and cause you to be less talkative at parties. You're going to feel the Asperger's invade with every second, your brain structure reforming itself to adapt to such a powerful source of ASD. Sorry, viewers, but you're going to have to enter the spectrum to understand any of this. And of course, there's spoilers. I mean, what are you, stupid? Now, it's quite obvious from even a cursory viewing of both series that the main characters, Tony Soprano and Shinji Ikari, are suffering from depression. While we can make the argument that Tony Soprano is some kind of sociopath, we could also say the same about Shinji Ikari. That might seem absurd, but considering the decision Shinji makes during Third Impact and his exposed resentment for humanity as a whole, we can definitely draw even further comparisons between Tony and Shinji. I'll admit this is a reach, alright? Anyway, we're just going to ignore the fact Tony is an incurable sociopath. Perhaps this is the main difference between these two characters. One is incurable, and the other isn't. See, the endings for Tony and Shinji are extremely different. Tony never solves his problems, nothing really changes about him, and he uses his own self-discovery as an excuse to keep being a horrible, horrible person. Shinji, on the other hand, earns his congratulations, and though it's not clear what happens after the close of Evangelion, we can imagine he's not going to be the same. He's going to be at least a little different. He's going to have a proper understanding of himself, not a deluded one like Tony. This is because Tony learns about himself through a shrink, while Shinji learns about himself through instrumentality, apocalyptic mind rape. Tony uses his depression diagnosis as a get-out-of-jail-free card. He's mentally ill, there's nothing he can do about it other than pop more Prozac. Shinji doesn't confront his issues due to a Dr. Milf-y and prescriptions, but is instead forced to confront them by the end of the world, basically. Put Tony through instrumentality and he might stop being a mobster asshole. That's basically what I'm saying. Let's continue. The main primary difference between Tony and Shinji is obvious. Tony is a balding, middle-aged Italian mafioso who literally resonates with charisma, while Shinji is an extremely young, socially awkward Japanese schoolboy who is totally reserved, a complete introvert. Polar opposites, right? However, there's a common link between Tony and Shinji, that being depression, as we just kind of explored, and lack of empathy. What do I mean by this? Well, Tony blames everyone but himself, and when he's forced to blame himself, he blames his depression, or he blames his mother. But we'll get to the mommy issues later, probably in a different video. Anyway, Shinji also blames everyone but himself. He never considers why others treat him the way they do, not until instrumentality, where he's exposed to the minds of others. Tony and Shinji are too busy sympathizing with themselves to really consider the predicaments of those closest to them. However, they exhibit this behavior in different ways. We'll use two examples. Tony kills Chrissy infamously in Season 6 and is extremely uncomfortable with his friends and family mourning Moltisanti's death. Instead of accepting the guilt that comes with murdering his longtime friend, mafia comrade, and relative, Tony ignores it and continues thinking about himself, pitying himself for having to put up with those who actually cared for Christopher. How about our example for Shinji? Well, Shinji refuses to attack that one angel because the fourth child is inside the corrupted Eva. He doesn't want to kill another person. And this seems like a contradiction with my earlier thesis, right? Not wanting to put somebody else in harm's way is very empathetic, right? Well, Shinji is doing this purely out of self-interest. Not intentionally, but unintentionally. This is a subconscious thing. He wants to avoid the guilt and the responsibility from that potential manslaughter so bad that he is willing to allow himself to die and potentially the rest of humanity, as the Angel already beat Unit 0 and Unit 2 by the time he's up to bat. Shinji isn't thinking rationally. His decision ends up more destructive, as it forces the use of the dummy plug, putting Toji at even further risk. If we compare how the dummy plug, Unit 1, attacks the corrupted Eva, it's quite like the berserking mode. A lot more violent and a lot more excessive. Meanwhile, if we look at how Shinji has destroyed, killed angels throughout the series, I don't know, I'd rather have that happen to me if I was inside the monster. I feel like I'd have better odds of survival. But Shinji's avoiding any sort of rationality in this situation, any sort of reason, because he wants to avoid the emotional weight that will come with making the right decision. He doesn't want to have to live with the potential consequences. Now, we certainly can't blame Shinji for not wanting to kill another person. It's just that if you look at the situation, we can clearly see that he's not merely refusing to kill somebody that doesn't need to die. He's putting everybody and everything at jeopardy. This is more of a result of emotional and mental instability than it is empathy. Tony, on the other hand, while he made a decision that is reasonable in getting rid of a junkie that could put his own future daughter at risk, the problem is this was all mostly to satisfy his own disgust, and murder itself is totally abominable, is totally reprehensible. So for our example for Shinji, we have a moment that is extremely understandable. We can definitely sympathize with Shinji for making the choice he does, even if it's out of his own self-interest, his own desire to protect himself, to shield himself from the responsibility, from the guilt of making the right decision. However, with Tony, can we really sympathize with him? He's murdering somebody who has given up so much for him. He's murdering somebody who trusts him so much. All in all, we can say that Tony creates a justification for a sin of passion, while Shinji avoids a justification for an unfortunately necessary casualty. They both do this because the desire to protect themselves and to satisfy themselves outweighs greatly the desire to help others, to consider others, to think about what is outside of their own box. Not to say they do not think about others, but the way they think of others is fundamentally flawed. Tony doesn't mourn for Christopher, and Shinji is more focused on using this opportunity to rage against his father, who he hates, instead of seeing if Toji is okay. Shinji even threatens to destroy half of HQ, which would make Toji's recovery even more difficult. I mean, it's hard to bring someone back from severe injuries if the hospital has been smashed by a giant fucking robot. Still, the example used for Tony here is so obviously morally evil, while the example used for Shinji is far easier to sympathize with, considering the situation and the immaturity of the younger Ikari. Both Tony and Shinji are self-destructive, though in different ways. Tony is implicitly self-destructive, meaning he makes decisions that line him up for defeat and failure in the long term. He squashes short-term problems without consideration for the consequences. Consider when he kills Ralphie over the hua. I mean the horse, okay? The horse.
You fucking killed her! You killed her! You fucking killed her!
Ralphie is his top earner, but he satisfies his rage instead of keeping someone who is all around loyal and extremely effective in the business. Now with Shinji, He is explicitly self-destructive, making choices that rarely benefit him in the short term or the long term. Is this intentional? Not necessarily. It's more subconscious. It's just the way that Shinji behaves. It's what is revealed to him during instrumentality. Shinji is trying to constantly please everyone around him, but by doing so pleases nobody around him. And because he doesn't receive the affection in return that he expects, that he desires, it all boils over, and he ends up trying to run away from his responsibilities and from his relationships several times throughout the show. That's the only thing he does for himself, and it's not a good thing, because he's pursuing the loneliness that he does not really desire, the loneliness that he thinks he desires. Even though he runs away, he comes back anyway, because Shinji fundamentally does what others want him to. This is another critical difference between Tony and Shinji, as the boss of the New Jersey family, I mean the glorified crew, does what he wants, not what others want, to the detriment of those around him. All in all, let's summarize this information overload. Tony Soprano, an aging man stuck in his midlife crisis, is depressed and uses that fact as yet another justification for his shitty behavior. He destroys himself and those around him, sometimes for good reasons, but most of the time for bad reasons. Whenever he's not busy sympathizing with himself, he's empathizing with animals, because animals are innocent while people are never innocent. Shinji, young and immature, has been flung into an extreme situation, definitely something more high stakes than the mob. Already depressed from his upbringing and daddy issues thanks to Gendo, Shinji wants others to solve his problems for him. He does whatever is asked of him, trying constantly to please everyone around him. This eventually boils over, and feeling mistreated by the people in his life, he runs away over and over again, coming back every time to do it all again. Because he relies so heavily on others, he too ends up seeing people as fundamentally guilty, not innocent, leading to his emotional decision during Third Impact: they can all just die. Of course, Tony Soprano's story ends with a bullet through the back of the head while he's enjoying onion rings with his family, while Shinji leaves the series having made progress, having truly figured himself out thanks to instrumentality. Of course, EOE and the show have two different endings, but they're still both optimistic. Just one more optimistic than the other. Shinji makes the decision to embrace the fear and misunderstanding of others so that he's able to interact with people again, to have the relationships that he pretends to despise, yet relying so much on. Anyway, thanks for watching. And everyone, remember to stay strapped. Also, if you conceal carry and have a pistol that is drop safe, don't be stupid, keep one in the chamber. Don't be the guy who can't pull his gun on some life-threatening thugs because racking the slide would blow your cover. Just a tip, okay? Guns are made to be safe. If you don't have a shitty gun, you can keep around in the chamber and the thing holstered, and you're not going to shoot yourself. It's not going to go off if somebody pushes you down onto the concrete, or if you pull out the gun and drop it on the floor. It's not going to go off if it's a well-engineered gun. So don't be a monkey, don't be a coward, keep one in the chamber if you're gonna carry. Congratulations for making it through probably the worst video I have ever uploaded onto YouTube in my life. And with that, farewell.
Fly me to the moon, let me play among the stars. Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars. In other words, hold my hand. In other words, baby, kiss me. Fill my heart with songs and let me swing forevermore. You are all I long for, all I worship and adore. In other words, please be true. In other words, I love you. Hey!